Okay, I think we'll get started. So let me just do a little bit of housekeeping to start with. Please note that we are recording this like we do with all of our webinars. We'll be then putting that on our YouTube shortly after this. Can everybody please turn off their microphones and cameras so we can focus on the speaker of today? And also note that we do take questions, but they'll be through the chat. So as the talk is going on, you can add them in the chat, and I'll read through them at the end. So great, welcome. So my name is Stephen Haven. I'm an AI consultant at the Energy Systems Catapult. This is a value in energy data seminar. We talk about sort of where digitalization and data is being used to support the energy sector. I'm very pleased today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ola Michailidze, who'll be talking about developing digital twins in the energy industry. A little intro before she starts. Ola is a lecturer in the digital futures in digital futures at the University of Bristol, and is also part of the Bristol Digital Future Institute. That's a very cool institute. I visited just the other week. Lots of brilliant technologies to sort of help people understand how we interact with that technology and how we can best utilize it. Ola's research revolves around understanding how interdisciplinary researchers collaborate and resolve tensions between legacy infrastructures and digital innovations. And in particular, Ola has applied this question to the context of critical infrastructures, cybersecurity, and the energy industry. And Ola is also a researcher in resident here at the Energy Systems Catapult, where we've been very pleased to host her. So without further ado, if I can get my computer working, I'm very happy to leave it to Ola to start the talk. And yeah, so take it away, please.
Thank you very much. Let me just quickly share the screen. Can you see the window okay?
Yep. Yeah, I see that.
No notes or anything like that?
No notes, just the
amazing,
pure,
cool. Look, this is great technology working for once. So hello everyone, I'm Ola, and as Steve said, I'm a researcher and lecturer based at the University of Bristol. Today in this presentation, I'll be mostly talking about the Researcher in Residence project, which has been a part of the Energy Systems Catapult, funded by Innovation Launchpad Plus, and I'll be talking about how innovators grappled with the concept of digital twins in the energy industry. Happy to talk later about the earlier research on NIST directive, cybersecurity, and the institute in general, but just to say in this talk, I'll be mostly focusing on digital twins. My background is in qualitative social science, which means that I research by the means of interviews and observations of practitioners who are involved in energy digitalization. And I try to understand their concerns, their challenges, but also then I try to zoom out, helping them to see the bigger picture when it comes to politics of innovation. So in this presentation, we'll be moving between the promises of digital twins and then how practitioners involved in the energy transitions are interacting with those promises. So to start, let's try to define digital twins. I would imagine that in this audience, most of you are familiar with the term. And personally, from attending countless industry and academic presentations, I can say it's the case where every community has its own definition, depending on a sector or industry. And to some people, it's a buzzword with no particular tech stack attached to it, something that people would cynically leverage to get funding when the weather for it is right. Whereas others try to come up with a community definition. So here, for example, we can see Energy Systems Catapult own definition from a previous report, which states that digital twin is a digital model which integrates two-way data flow between the model and a physical object or a system. We're making a change to one, change the other. For example, a control center network map, which displays real-time system status and enables engineers to control assets to mitigate issues. So far, so good. And I think regardless of what your personal definition or opinion about digital twins is, I think it's still a case worth researching purely because digital twin developers, as well as governments, have been spending millions of pounds or euros on research and development in recent years. And in doing that, and in kind of zooming into the money spent on pilot projects and initiatives, we can see how hype becomes an analytical category in itself rather than something that we should simply dismiss. And so in this presentation, I'll be trying to lay out why digital twin hype was attractive in the first place, who are the main actors, whether their feelings or opinions change over time, and to what extent practitioners are reflective of it currently. Okay. So why would it matter how innovators, policymakers, or research funding bodies frame digital twins? So I'll be arguing that digital twins hype matters because it does 4 things. So first of all, it mobilizes people, energy, and resources. Second, it leads to disappointment once some pretty obvious operational issues are showing up. Third, it allows a quiet realignment of priorities. And fourth, it conceals certain concerns about future energy governance. And now it's important on the final point, on this 4th point, that this concealment of politics is not necessarily kind of an action of an exaggerated cartoon big tech villain. And more often it's the case that energy industry stakeholders are simply keen to pragmatically agree on digitalization initiatives, skirting over the question of who wins or who loses. And it's precisely our role as social scientists to remind industry about the importance of these questions. Oh, I think someone's mic is on. So in order to frame my presentation, I'll be briefly sharing previous research on promises, expectations, and hype coming from a field called Science and Technology Studies. So the roles of hype I've mentioned in the previous slide have been previously described in the literature, so I'm not here claiming novelty, rather than I'm showing how this applies to digital twins and UK energy. So I'd like to make the case that the industry creating and assessing hype is worth of our attention. So, for example, Neil Pollock and Robin Williams from Edinburgh University interviewed Gartner consultants about how they work with a so-called hype cycle, as pictured in this slide. And by the way, there is no scientific basis for this cycle. There is no evidence that innovations actually go through these particular stages in this particular order. And there are only 4 stages, or well, 5 stages to start with. And actually, during interviews with Gartner, consultants admitted that their role was about creating an impression of correct prediction of the future. And since predicting the future of innovation trajectories is inherently difficult, or maybe impossible, as some would say, consultants engaged in periodical renaming of their technology so that they wouldn't be held accountable for their predictions over time if you were to look back at Gartner reports from previous years. So, for example, we would see smart cities renamed to connected cities, then renamed to IoT and planning, and so on and so on. And these concepts would be shape-shifting and moving on a cycle curve so that you could never trace them over the years on that kind of a singular curve. And now I guess we can see a similar trend with digital twins where the tech stack associated can vary from VR, GIS, dashboards, communication platforms, modeling software, sensors, and many others. And they're not really all happening at the same time as well, or integrated into a single product. So coming back to key functions of hype, 3 main things I like to draw from this slide are first, idea of mobilization and enrollment of stakeholders, which usually happens through ambiguity of buzzwords, revolutionary promises, appeals to inevitability of innovation, or appeals to living in extraordinary times. Second, innovation scholars argue that software entrepreneurs who pitch their visions to policymakers, again, they also engage in this continuous realignment of their promises. So they simultaneously evoke long-term ambitious societal visions of net zero 2050 or, secure Europe in 2050 and 2030 and so on and so on. But actually what they're delivering are mere prototypes of future technological solutions. And then if initial promises of innovations are not realized, funders would then pivot to another use case and buzzword while often portraying faithfulness to the original mission statement. And these practices support each other in the realigning of the relations between entrepreneurs and policymakers. So failure is now reframed to be lessons learned. A prototype will become a reason for celebration rather than impatience with realizing the full vision. And the third criticism of hype is that it distracts us from serious and infrastructural work requiring mundane and showy efforts, instead promising simple fixes and silver bullets. So I think anyone who has been working on the aging public IT infrastructures and then will be comparing them to, say, the recent UK AI action plan would hopefully be able to see the dissonance between the technologies that are urgently needed to be maintained or upgraded and technologies that are promoted in the venture capital economy. And finally, I'd like to share an observation about how these stories of hype should be told. So here I'd like to agree with Vasilis Galanos from Stirling University, who argues that we should be allowing ourselves to flesh out the complexities, multiple perspectives, and effectively write stories of hype, which are longitudinal, open-ended, and dynamic. And this is because innovations don't follow this neat Gartner adoption cycle, or they don't necessarily follow this clear and easily distinguishable series of summers and winter. Now, a quick disclaimer here, Vasilis' research is about AA hype since the 1950s, and I'm going to be glossing over the prehistory and just focusing on the past few years. And the second body of literature I'm drawing from is the critical data studies. So this is there's a fairly, I think, modest number of articles analyzing digital twins from this perspective. And I would say, in general, scholars will be looking at politics of datafication as a kind of larger trend, let's say. And to give you some examples of previous studies, Michelle Verstelaken from Cambridge University shows how digital twin applications promote reductionism fragmented model of biodiversity, which actually prioritize engagement with local citizens or local issues, instead privileging kind of a global and international view of diversity. And next, an interesting study from Jana Boaeva, who looked at the case study of Autodesk, which is a company that owns a platform for building information modeling, which is another name for digital twins used in construction sector. So her paper shows that the adoption of Autodesk in construction industry follows a platform logic, where Autodesk have become a new monopolist in the sector through the mechanisms of lock-in through subscription models and control over data formats, standards, and then training requirements for engineers and architects. And I guess, I'll be interested to see whether there are any risks of parallels in the energy sector. Now, as you can see, most of this previous research comes from other sectors rather than industry, which is fine. And, some of the critiques could be useful for energy industry. Do I think there is still a gap in specific sector understanding that should be addressed? So I'd like to make a modest proposal for how I would like to research energy critically and kind of politically, but also in an engaged way. So I think it's very important because energy infrastructure itself is where the bulk of decarbonization takes place, as we know, hopefully in this room. And this is empirically and conceptually different from, say, concepts like smart cities, smart homes, or emissions in data centers, because energy sector is governed and owned in different way to other areas. So in my view, the future research on energy digitalization should be, first of all, attentive to the key values of energy sector, the safety criticality, the presence of legacy infrastructures and the need to maintain them. Second, the research will be understanding of the complexity across private sector, government and citizen. And again, here going beyond the critic of big tech and focusing on other software companies operating in that sector. Third, you will be committed to decarbonization of the grids. And fourth, it will be assuming good faith from the practitioners and would offer constructive criticism. So here's a summary of my methods. So for the past several months, I was engaged in multi-sited ethnography, which just means that I have immersed myself in the world of digital twins through attending lots of industry events, conferences, interviews. Basically, I'll take any opportunity that I had when I could speak to people, whether online and in person. And for those who don't know about the methods, ethnography is essentially about participating and observing someone else's culture. And here the culture, we could say, is innovation in energy. And yeah, so if you need some kind of popular cultural references, you kind of think of me as a wannabe Louis Theroux from the Weird Weekends era, although I wish. And I guess the reason why it's called multi-sited is because there is no single place where energy digital twins are developed. The community itself is dispersed. It comes from different organizations, and it's often it happens online. So for me, it was important to sign up to all sorts of things, webinar, conferences, you name it. And Energy System Catapult have been really helpful with leveraging access and also lending their expertise. And also I have been on the advisory board for a few initiatives. So one, Alan Turing Digital Twin Network Plus, which is a kind of big research funding initiative, and second, Ensign, which is a Scotland-led energy digital twin project. Okay, And before we move on to analysis, I'm going to briefly sketch the background to energy digitalization. I'm assuming most of you will be familiar with this, so I'm not going to spend much time on this slide. So again, the first motivating force to mention for the digitalization is recent electrification of the sector, which in practice means more assets, more intermittency, more complexity. From that, we have seen the presumed open data license condition made as a requirement by Ofgem following ESC guidance. So now energy networks effectively have to triage and share their data as practically as feasible. Over the last year, we have seen Ofgem's move to a policy consultation on data sharing. So there was a consultation on consumer consent and data sharing infrastructure is more kind of industry oriented. And a few months ago, parts of the previously privately owned National Grid ESO are now in public hands and called NESO, which is independent public body responsible for planning and operating Great Britain electricity and gas network. And NESO itself has been using the language of digital twins by working on a project called the Virtual Energy System over the past few years. And the project focused on identifying relevant use cases for digital twins and developing a common framework demonstrator, that is, common languages and process that would enable interoperability. So now let's briefly look at the prehistory of digital twins in the context of other industries. Pretty much every single industry talk on digital twins I've attended mythologized the origin of digital twins as something that initially took place during the Apollo 13 mission in 1970. For those who haven't heard, the mission was supposed to be the third time humans would stand on the moon. However, due to the oxygen tank explosion, the spaceship had instead been looping around the moon for a few days, but eventually made a safe return. And at the time in the 1970s, no one talked about digital twins. It's only in the later retellings NASA's official sources would state that NASA employed multiple simulators to evaluate the failure and extended a physical model of the vehicle to include digital components. This digital twin was first of its kind, allowing for continuous ingestion of data to model the events leading up to the accident and for forensic analysis and exploration of next steps. So that's kind of the mythology of digital twins, let's say. And fast forward a few decades, there are several different technologies or products that people refer to as digital twins. And again, it really depends what company is kind of doing the talk here. So to someone like Autodesk, it's about creating a 3D version of CAD. To someone like Meta, it will be about 3D models that people engage with via VR. To NVIDIA, it's about creating models with the level of details that justify parallel computations, that will justify selling more chips. To urban planning startups, it's about revamping established GIS software and making more fit for purpose for a particular question. And in terms of popularity of digital twins, a few policy moments are worth mentioning. So in 2016, government mandated that public sector would centrally procure construction projects that are delivered through BIM. In 2018, the Centre for Digital Build Britain was set up. That was a collaboration with the government, Cambridge University, and a consultancy, Arup. And during the operation, the centre released several position papers, governance and ethics framework, and mobilized over 150 members in a hub, which is still in operational today. And they organized, weekly meetings and larger conferences. In 2022, a document called Cyber Physical Infrastructure Vision was released, and this time the direction of travel wasn't construction, but robotics. And the document was really successful in the sense that it led to personal response from the former Minister of Science, Research and Innovation, and it led to a public consultation on digital twins. However, soon after, the momentum slowed down a bit, and mostly this happened because digital twins did not make the cut for the so-called 5 critical technologies, which is a kind of government's way to strategize which 5 technologies get millions rather than billions of pounds in investment. So at the time, the 5 that made the cut is artificial intelligence, engineering, biology, future telecoms, semiconductors, and quantum. And apparently digital twins were just under the line. And in our interviews recalling the event, they did not win because of a lack of clear vision at the time. So I think this lack of a clear vision is important because digital twins are effectively easier to explain in those tangible industrial contexts like robotics or manufacturing or buildings, where people literally talk about creating fine-grained models of real things with real-time feedback loops and actuation. And in the past 2 or 3 years, something kind of strange happened and the definition has been stretched to include things as broad as national level energy policy scenarios, home retrofits, decisions about where to place EV charging points, and so on, and let alone kind of concepts outside energy, like, I don't know, mental health of students and so on, like quite a broad variety of concepts. And these domains are not just more complex than modeling an airplane engine, but they just qualitatively different, and they cannot be reduced to a closed system. And I guess historically, this is not the first time we've been hearing analogies between computer systems and biological or social entities. Over the 20th century, the field known as cybernetics came up with an ambitious and supposedly universally applicable theory of systems and control, introducing the language of feedback, black boxes, and self-regulations. And for some of the concepts of cybernetics are still in use today, the field fell out of favor over 1960. And if anyone wants to learn more about this concept, a documentary called All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace by Adam Curtis gives you more detail. But essentially what Adam Curtis is arguing is that cybernetic researchers at the time were drawing from rather poor quality ecology studies from kind of early 20th century, which implied that there is such thing as natural state of balance in animal, plant, or human life. And the modern ecology research shows that this is kind of a mere metaphor. The nature is not in balance by some sort of the nature is not in balance by nature. Sorry for the clunky phrasing. Anyway, the reason why I'm mentioning this in relation to digital twins, it's important to acknowledge that how governments and technologists drew from scientific theories to ensure that their proposals came across as neutral and objectives. And the politics hidden in this way of translating science into the public is the tacit assumption that the natural and desirable balance is whatever the current or political system of values is. So I think it's important to consider that as we see innovators proposing digital twins or entities that are totally different from, again, these actually existing control systems found in machines. So now we'll zoom into the analysis of digital twins hype in the energy sector. I have arranged it into 4 stages: first, mobilization; 2, disappointment; 4, realignment; and 4, concealment. Again, to kind of preempt any criticism of the kind of repeating hype cycle curve, there are caveats here. So I'm not claiming generalizability of these 4 stages to other technologies. This is simply kind of a narrative tool that allows me to tell a chronological story of the digital twins hype. And a second, these 4 stages are not final. The issue is still open to future shifts, and by no means is not a finished story. Okay, so let's start with mobilization. In the first stage, participants told me that they explicitly kept their mission statements and funding calls as vague as possible to attract a broad church of people and inspire them with ambitious visions. In the meantime, Arup, so the same consultancy working on the Centre for Digital Build Britain, did a scoping study identifying 17 energy-specific projects, and together with a National Grid ESO, Arup led on the delivery of the project called Virtual Energy System, which I mentioned before. And at the time, initially, VEST was gathering requirements for this future vision of large-scale replica of energy system, and at the time it commissioned smaller demonstrators. And I think here demonstrators are critical to understanding of innovation culture. And these grand visions, like creating a replica of the entire UK grid, which VEST initially kind of had in mind, they do not really have to be realized as long as they demonstrated. So in this case, pilot projects demonstrated elements of the technical feasibility of the larger idea. For example, that code might run, or maybe that Bayesian modeling works for particular projects, for, say, predicting scenarios. Or maybe that it's possible to create attractive visualizations that a test user would like. But again, everything was done at the time with dummy data, which leads us to the crux of the problem, namely working with real energy data from energy companies. And at this stage also, we saw a lot of discussions about data ethics. A very particular vision for data ethics was promoted, which was mostly principle-based and oriented around responsible software development practices, such as removing biases, improving end-user trust, or ensuring accurate representations of phenomena of data. So moving to the second stage, I've noticed that while my informants were excited about pilot projects at conferences and webinars, in private, they have revealed impatience with the demonstrator culture and argued for proper strategic mandate from the government. And at heart, there is, I think, an inherent juxtaposition in the government presentations for the digital twin visions for 2030 and beyond, yet funding only being confirmed from mere pilot projects, which often would be as short as kind of several few week-long sprints. And those more candid interviews with innovators, they would simply admit that they struggled with developing a business model for digital twins and the reality where it's difficult to work with real industry data. So at this stage, I heard plenty of calls like we need to set up a central office for orchestrating data sharing. And this move to coordinated data sharing would be done via a communal trusted solution, which would be in practice an API-enabled platform where users would log in and access data in a standardized format. So in short, I think what it turned out with time that research participants realized that this early kind of cybernetic looking vision about control optimization, real-time data, and kind of all-encompassing twin doesn't do enough to communicate the need to completely overhaul how data is shared in energy. So what happened next in the agenda? I've noticed a subtle shift to discussing digital twins as ecosystems or infrastructures for data sharing rather than kind of new generations of models and simulators. In multiple conferences, I've noticed speakers, mostly in the government, cautioning that they're not building digital twins, but they're establishing rules of the road for the future. And here, the involvement of the government-led program was critical to position the initiative as fair, neutral, that is leveling playing field, and careful about commercial interests of parties involved. And here, closer to home, Ofgem has consulted on the data sharing infrastructures, and I've been involved in it, and we can only expect a few steps in a few months' time. And I think reflecting on the hype, I think that this convenient ambiguity of buzzword like digital twins allowed stakeholders to quietly realign their priorities while externally projecting a natural progression of the program. And it's worth noting that actually the shift from framing digital twins as models to digital twins as infrastructures for data sharing brought forward a new priority, which is interoperability. And in the words of one of my participants, they said, you should write a critical paper on the need for caution with terminology. Digital twin agenda was never about total cybernetic system, but about interoperability. And I think what's interesting about interoperability, that it's also soon became a buzzword. So far, I've noticed interoperability in the context of digital twins is something that was expressed in multiple ways. So first, as a policy vision for mutually beneficial cross-organizational collaboration. Also, second, as a legal intervention to prevent monopolization and incentivize competition. And three, as a set of technical metadata standards to enable all parties to understand meaning of the data. And more importantly, while these different meanings were leveraged, different groups tend to discuss the ideas in separation, which I think limits the ability to see the politics hidden in databases, software architectures, and data formats. And I think this inability to see politics and data brings me to the final stage of analysis, that is this notion of concealment of ethical and political issues related to digital twins. And just to give you an example how siloed these conversations were. So first, I've witnessed a conversation from lawyers involved in the Digital Twin Hub who would comment on the possibility of translating the EU Interoperability Act to the UK. That would allow to understand the price of data sharing and effects of fair competition. Second, I was also involved in a group of computer scientists at Alan Turing Institute's event who are interested in interoperability in a semantic level, that is, again, arriving at accurate and shared standards of metadata and technical ways of obtaining permissions from data sharing platforms. Now, the problem is that these groups don't talk to each other, and they should. They've expressed willingness to do so, but I guess we still haven't seen the platform for this to actually happen in practice. So yeah, this is something that I hope that will be advanced in the future. So, reflecting on where energy sector is, I think it's in a very interesting place. What used to be a fairly stable engineering-led industry is now slowly entering into collaborations with software industries. So on the engineering side, we've got a world of maintaining messy legacy systems, data in obscure formats, and interest in keeping things operational. And then on the software side, we see companies seeking market opportunities, procurement contracts from governments, and a drive to experiment with data. And And I think these clashes of engineering and software worlds is precisely where we need to look to understand the challenges and the potential of digital twins in energy. And understanding those new entrants from the IT worlds and the relationships they might intermediate and the powers they might gain should be the key to understanding the politics of energy digitalization. So here's on the kind of little slide on the notion of anticipation, where the politics of energy data might lie. Let me bring you a few provocations to consider as a topic, a few future topics to watch. So I'm kind of, I guess, playing the role of Gartner consultant here. So I'd like to know your thoughts about what do you think about these scenarios or these kind of I don't know, future anticipations. I'm welcome any feedback here. So some things to look at, first of all, the changing role of energy suppliers. So they're not the companies anymore who have very limited interaction with customers when they just bill them once a month and barely speak to them. Second, the idea of changing role of energy networks, whether they could be gatekeepers or facilitators of innovations due to data access and maybe how neatly they manage to organize their data. Also, the changing role of of regulators. So where does Ofgem need to look to prevent regulatory capture and unfair competition? Also, what is the future of consumer energy data? Who else would be accessing energy data? Would it be possible for it to be accessed to third parties, whether insurance, adverts, or training LLMs? Also, what is the servitization of domestic energy? Could we have something like heat as a service? Could we be more dependent on upgrading compatible products and accruing additional charges for software licenses? Also, another idea is that one of the participants fleshed out is monopoly of a backend, so that the idea that government is currently getting into contracts with software providers for building of data sharing infrastructures, and what will be those powers of those software providers, and if they have a kind of natural monopolistic character, how to make sure that the relationships are fair going forward. And finally, this idea of engineering versus software culture. So if energy companies are increasingly tech companies rather than engineering companies, how is going to be reflected in hiring, skills base, and kind of a move from safety culture to innovation culture? So I just wanted to mention a few kind of high-level summaries from the consultation responses I have been engaged in over the past year or so. So on the Ofgem consumer consent solution, some of the things I've said is that we need a jargon-free mechanism, which includes an ability to revoke consent and also shared understanding of what consent means across developers and end users. Also, I've noticed that it's vital to clearly define what those use cases for consumer data sharing are, and that we make sure that we don't include any use cases which include corporate surveillance or profiling for advertising. And again, the scope of third parties need to be clearly understood and communicated to the members of the public. Oh, sorry. On the idea of data sharing infrastructures, when asked about the suitability of NISA as an interim coordinator, I have agreed that this is the best option out of the ones proposed, but I also stressed the importance of careful treatment of a potentially existing conflict of interest and the need for transparency. So a few years back, Ofgem commissioned audit of what used to be at the time National Grid, ESO, IT estate, and the audit itself raised serious concerns about the capability to manage the IT estate and the expenses involved in that. So I would like some more clarity from Ofgem about the outcomes of this audit and I guess the differences on the capabilities between the old NG ESO and the new NISA entity and their capabilities to govern and manage large IT projects. On the consultation on AI in the energy sector, I guess I've raised the caution that AI should not be viewed simply as a set of modeling techniques, but as a global supply chain market, which includes companies that create foundational models, companies that manufacture chips, like all sorts of companies that are operational in the UK and globally. And I guess I've also emphasized the highly speculative characteristic and the fact that AI, especially generative AI, has a poorly defined business model as a stand. And the focus of the government should be on understanding the competing interests of key players in the energy space. I've also cautioned that Optim should focus on evaluating to what extent the benefits of proposed use cases of AI and to what extent the benefits outweigh the costs, risks of harms, and that governments should avoid commissioning biased reports that only specify benefits but not costs. And finally, on the kind of AI and copyright, which is not energy right consultation, but I think is still relevant to energy sector. Here the government proposed the solution that is called like an opt-out clause, where creators, artists would be what they outputs will be permitted for AI training unless they specifically opt out of this scheme. And I have argued that this is not a balanced approach to the UK creative and AI sector, because it places disproportionate burden on creators whose working conditions have already been made precarious over the past years, whether through visas after Brexit or streaming services and record labels. Okay, so just a few ideas for the future. So the paper that is based on this presentation will be out soon in Environmental Science and Policy. I think I'll be able to share it very, very, very soon. So you can email me for a copy if you like it. I'm also working with an artist called Johnny Heath on a series of short stories and poetry inspired by this research project. That the publication will be out, I think, in April, and then we'll plan an event in Bristol in 2025. I'm also working on a card game that would help digital twin innovators talking about challenging subjects. Call it Oblique Strategies for Digital Twins, which is a rip-off Brian Eno's game. If you have heard about it, it's really fun. And it's, for me, again, it's like an excuse to talk to people and hopefully talk to people in a more candid way about the issues. I'm also building a project website with all outputs and reports, which will launch April 2025. I'm also organizing a Hype Studies conference in Barcelona. That's in September 2025. And it's open to people from all backgrounds. So if you'd like to attend, please let me know. Here are the references that I've used for this talk. And this is my email address if you'd like to get in touch in the future. Cool. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ola. That was really interesting. I love a good card game as well. So it'd be good to see a prototype of that at some point. I've got a couple of questions. There's a few questions in the chat as well and some comments. But I'd be interested. I like the idea of the sort of talking about around hype. My area is artificial intelligence, which obviously has quite a considerable amount of hype around it, and sometimes that's realized and other times maybe less so. I guess I'm seeing more and more people sort of being turned off by, hype or at least, things that seem a bit more exaggerated as well than what they are. The term smart was used a lot more. I think it's being sort of squeezed out a bit, and I think people kind of roll their eyes a little bit more when they hear things are being smart sometimes. And you say that, there is an interesting that you're saying that people are renaming things, therefore, to sort of continue interest. Like, is there sort of diminishing returns with something like that? Do you see, though, where if there's continually maybe not quite the delivering on something that actually, that doesn't quite cut the mustard?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would actually argue that in case of energy industry, the energy industry digitalization agenda was already quite advanced before digital twins were, a buzzword. So Energy Systems Catapult, the Laura Sandys report, they were hugely influential. And I feel like that the industry already made a really good case on in under which conditions digitalization or data sharing is needed. And I kind of feel like digital twins kind of backtrack this early, very important visioning. So participants would say to me often that they simply wasted a lot of time with digital twins in the sense that each time they they were presenting the pilots to external stakeholders, they would have to spend, a non-trivial amount of time on explaining what this thing is and what it does, what it doesn't do, and yeah, just the concept of digital twins. It led to this need for expectation management that just kind of engage in this ongoing disappointment between people who deliver the products and people who listen to presentations. So yeah, I would actually say that, maybe ironically sticking to the earlier ESC outputs and recommendations would be the way forward here.
Thanks. The other sort of thing here is that, contrasting maybe AI with digital twins, and I'm not a sociologist here, so maybe I'll be way off the mark here, but I guess with sort of new ideas and how you can transmit things, it very much there's the phrase, the medium is the message, right? In terms of what you can present to the public and therefore how you sort of can shift the use of technology. I guess I feel with the AI, there's a continued interest, the ChatGPT a few years ago released, and there's still a lot of interest in this. It seems to be because they're continually releasing products to keep that interest as well. You have Sora came out, you have like DeepSeek has come out with sort of reasoning and lower computational costs. Whereas with digital twins, it feels like it's sort of the use is only there once there's maybe more of an advanced product, when lots of pieces have come together. Is then aligning the sort of promotion of that, or at least the sort of advertisement of that, aligned, do you think, with the type of technology you use? And how you should sort of change your messaging should be aligned to what you have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let me just try to disentangle the question. Well, I think what made generative AI hype really successful is that I think we sort of slept on the issue of, overlooked at the issue of data access, and effectively OpenAI managed to scrape a large parts of the web before we kind of realized the consequences of it. Whereas I think with digital twins, it's like the other way around. The starting point is industry data, like just inherently proprietary, and government data, which is in differing format and quality of sharing when it comes to that. So in a way, it's like a similar concept but different starting points, and I guess that's why now there is so much emphasis on data sharing and making that happen. I guess there's maybe not enough of a distinction, is that when we talk about data sharing, do we talk about public data sharing, business to business, or business to public, or some other configuration of that? Because there's a huge copyright implications and huge implications for the kind of everyday day-to-day citizen politics when it comes to whose data are shared. So I'm not sure that this is answering your question. Maybe you could rephrase it actually.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably maybe a bit wider than probably, but I think you hit on many points there. So I'll probably not. I'll go to some of the comments and maybe I'll expand on some a bit later. Just a quick, I guess it's more of a comment, but I guess it'd be interesting to get your views on this. Hugh mentions about sort of point 4 that you had in your list about selling consumer data, and that's a cause of a lot of concern about data sharing. It's not central to the need for data sharing to manage supply and demand. I guess is I think obviously there's been some abuses in the past of data sometimes. So have you got some comments on sort of the restrictions that maybe should be around that sort of data sharing and guarantees that people have?
Yeah, I think this is exactly something that if you'd ask, an average person what they think about their data being sold, I would say that people are still very much concerned about privacy, especially in the, in the scheme of last few weeks, when we saw how increasingly, the big tech companies come into kind of close relationships with the leaders of Western countries. So it's a non-trivial question, and if often wants to ensure trust, that the trust should be institutional. So the trust should be about assurances about what are the third parties that it's okay to share data with, and for whether it's for commercial purposes, for research purposes, how do the benefits are then distributed across society. This needs to be very clearly laid out. And from attending the consumer data sharing consultation workshops, I feel like currently the consumer data sharing dashboard is very much focusing on the kind of user experience on the kind of, how to say it, this being the data sharing being readable in a sense, like maybe your cookie banner is readable, that it's you can accept or reject, but the kind of the very fine detail of it, the political implications of it aren't quite laid out. And I'd like a little bit more honest conversation about it. Yeah, and maybe the words actually privacy being a bit more of a priority as well, because currently I think we very much bent on security as a priority, which is, fair enough. It's obviously needed. But privacy has been a little bit backgrounded, I think, in Optum lately.
On that topic, just a comment here. Bill is very keen to hear more on your work in cybersecurity at some point as well. So maybe you could put a link in the chat as well to some talks you might have in that area or papers. You asked actually a question. Sorry.
Sorry, no, you go on. Sorry, I was just reading that.
Just a comment on that, really. I'm sure we could have you talking about cybersecurity maybe down the line as well.
Yeah, for sure. So my work on cybersecurity was mostly done around where the NIS directive was first being translated into the UK. So, the first NIS directive thing was decided in 2016 in the EU and then transposed to the UK a few years later. And it's an ongoing thing. So it's not something that is like done and dusted. It's obviously like things that take ages to approve. And I guess at the time, I was trying to understand CAF, so that kind of the main document that operators of infrastructures are sort of checking themselves against, how they understand CAF and how they try to fill it, and how they also collaborate with the regulators, so competent authorities they called in that language, to fill it together. And I guess the interesting thing about the CAF at the time was that the direction of travel from the government is to avoid so-called like prescriptive governance. So they very much wanted to go away from the kind of tick box movement. So they didn't want just people to, okay, do I have a firewall? Yes. Okay, I'm secure now. The movement at the time was towards this risk-based thinking, where you get people to really think about cybersecurity. But what happened then, ironically, is that because of how energy sector is very diverse in terms of their cybersecurity maturity, it effectively brought those already mature organizations quite like down, and they were kind of like boards of the CAF, and they were just like doing the bare minimum, whereas the companies which effectively kind of benefited from CAF were the ones that were at the very bottom of the pile, let's say, when it comes to maturity. So then what Optum did later, they did like a kind of like a baseline and more advanced version of CAF, and they tried to kind of maneuver with that. But yeah, I think there is maybe a little bit of an inherent paradox in these claims about avoiding prescription and cybersecurity regulations, because after all, people who usually are responsible for filling those forms are people from process engineers background. Again, they kind of typically, let's say, like old school engineers, like in the 60s, not IT people, they're engineers people, and they always been trained to think about life as, their professions as tick boxes. So I guess we kind of identify this, I don't know, maybe like a cultural difficulty there, let's say. But I can link a paper or report with more details about that.
Thanks. There's a few more questions here. I'll just try and get through them here. Here was another one about what evidence have you seen that energy digital twin developers have articulated a clear use case for their digital twins, where the rights and obligations regarding access to the data and its use have been carefully considered and documented?
Yeah, I think that's the problem, that the access to data from the pilot projects that I have been looking at. So the pilot projects that have been developed, I don't know, in 2020, 2022, let's say, pretty much all of the projects were using dummy data, dummy values, so not real energy data. And that was kind of like seen as a kind of problem for later, this kind of assumption that this doesn't matter for the demonstrator. All it matters for the demonstrator is showing that the code works. It's not if we input some dummy values there. And only with the kind of recent developments where the the data sharing infrastructure was consulted on, there have been some initial MVP use cases. So I think there's outage planning, and then there are some others, and I think these use cases are now being developed to actually concern real data access. And yes, I think it's very much like an ongoing thing. There is no solution. I mean, there's several organizations which work in that space. So Icebreaker One is working on a solution which will allow data sharing. I know that the Credo project, which was about which was called like a climate resilience demonstrator, at the time they struggled very much with data access across companies, and they have been sharing their difficulties very openly about that. But as far as I'm concerned, there is no kind of a finished solution, or there's no agreed solution for that yet.
Thank you. Ben's talking about whether you've explored or been involved in the Bristol City Leap model. It might be more about getting in contact with you later. So I guess you're open to being contacted about this.
For sure. Very, very happy to, or any kind of further follow-up information. I can put my email address in the bottom of the chat again, if you'd like.
Yeah, please, that'd be great. And anyone else, please feel free to contact Ola with your questions about digital twins and cybersecurity and everything else in between. Nigel has a question about, I guess, the data that's involved with digital twins. They might obviously become like everything else on the internet, the ability to scrape them. And I guess there's additional information here because this contains things like the relationships between different data sets. And do you know much about sort of I guess we talked about consumer data protections here, but the data that goes into both feeding the digital twins and then sort of constructing them is things that have been often funded through public money and or innovation projects. Can you discuss maybe the protections that have gone around sort of what's the data behind and the information behind the digital twins themselves, and how others can use them?
Yes, I guess that's like the whole question about data sharing infrastructure and about understanding the whole spectrum of openness. So if Open Data Institute, a few years ago, they've released this infographic about spectrum of open data. And I guess open doesn't always mean like publicly accessible, that is like out there. And the way data sharing infrastructure is supposed to work is that there will be a platform that will be available to users who will register, and then depending on what sort of users they will be tagged with various kind of like access permissions, and they will only be able to see that the data that they kind of have other people have agreed to share with them. Now this is very much like an early stage. The way data access have been done in energy so far, as far as I understand, is through bilateral legal contracts. And I guess the whole question is, okay, from a legal perspective, how are you going to do it at scale, but that is efficient, but also that it's respectful of copyright, respectful of understanding the future business model. So again, I don't think there is an answer for that, but I think data sharing infrastructures is something to watch definitely in the energy sector and beyond.
Thank you. There's two more questions here, but I'll ask Tigay's first because actually he's asked a couple of questions, so maybe get that at the end if we have time. Tigay is really asking about your views on like how and your frameworks to sort of measure the impact of these digital twins, really, in terms of the energy, bidirectional energy transactions, business implications, organizational culture, I guess a whole host of things, really. Like, as maybe new tools with obviously enhanced capabilities, how do you go around ensuring you can measure the impact of these things? I guess the complexity is that they obviously involve lots of components as well.
I'm not sure if I can comment on this particular question because I didn't measure impact of those technologies, but I have looked at. But I think I'd like to call for a little bit of honesty with regards to measuring impact, the costs and benefits. So in the the UK government, the so-called Green Book for kind of major infrastructure projects, it has methodologies which are kind of officially government approved for measuring costs and benefits. And I guess these methodologies come with all sorts of caveats about their assumptions and so on. But I think here is like the call to be as transparent as possible with your assumptions and with your predictions, because, you know, obviously you kind of want to make the technologies look good and you want to say that all the benefits outweigh the costs and so on. But yeah, can you have really good evidence to prove that? So yeah, one report that I have saw recently was like a government commission report on which was called Economic Benefit Analysis of Digital Twins in Transport. And to me, it struck me as like a little bit disingenuous, because the report claims every other page that is drawing from the government approved methodology of cost benefit analysis, but all it did was economic benefit analysis without the costs. And yeah, and I acknowledge this is really difficult to know in those, you know, early stage speculative projects, but we need to be very honest, and we can't just be saying that we are following government official approved terminology if we aren't. So yeah.
Yeah, impact is a complex as well, isn't it? As well. Okay, last question, I guess, from Hugh then here. Just looking at the origins of digital twins in the aerospace sector, there's an emphasis on realistic models with physical characteristics. And this seems to be maybe less emphasized in the current models. Maybe they're a bit more sort of on digital transfers and that sort of thing. I guess, can you give examples where in the digital twins you looked at where they're actually modeling physical characteristics and behavior of the twin physical entities?
Yeah, so I think like going back to this original view of modeling physical entities rather than the kind of 3D and VR movement, I think it's most of the energy, the future twins of the grid. I think I would say that's the kind of the use case where people coming to this original definition. And yeah, that's kind of evidence with the proposed use case for the data sharing infrastructure being the planning of network outages, and where the collaboration will be between, say, I don't know, wind turbine operators and transmission operators and the regional operators, and they will collaborate, sharing data between each other about planned outages of, say, like a singular or, you know, like a small number of wind turbines, and how that affect the whole grid management. So I think this to me, like, I can see this as a kind of digital twin. It makes sense. Yeah, it's only once you go to those like more kind of socio-technical or biological metaphors, then that starts to be a little bit funny to me. But then for network management, I can totally see this as being a use case.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we're pretty much at time now, so we'll probably have to wrap things up. So I want to thank you very much, Ola, for a brilliant talk, really interesting. And please get in contact with Ola if you have further questions. I think your email on the slides, which we'll be sharing anyway.
Yeah, I can also share in the chat as well.
So we'll share that with everyone who's registered anyway. We'll Ola's put her email in the chat as well, and we'll also be putting the recording on the YouTube channel. That'll also be linked in the email. So thanks a lot to everybody for attending. Thanks for answering all those questions, Ola, and it'll be great to see how things develop in this area. And we can we'll keep in touch, of course.
Thank you.
Keep an eye on what's going on. So thanks very much to everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.